All right. Today we're going to do some light discussion on responsibility and accountability. You guys up for it? Yeah, you know. One of the easier topics to talk about. Let me recap, since it's been a week, well, 2 weeks, a week in between, since we've been talking about Hebrews. So, we've been talking about Hebrews. We talked about how there's this, 3 weeks ago, this beautiful, like, attention-grabbing introduction where scholars call him the preacher, right? Since they don't know who wrote Hebrews, and since Hebrews is kind of like a sermon, the preacher of Hebrews lays out this beautiful introduction. He puts in everything that he's going to talk about in that, and it grabs everybody's attention. And then, after that, he goes on to quote a string of passages to talk about how the Son is superior to the angels. This was something that Tony talked about. I better turn this on. That Tony talked about 2 weeks ago. And so the preacher makes 3 points in that section. He talks about how the Son, he has a unique relationship to the Father, and he quotes a string of Old Testament verses. For instance, Psalms 2:7, I will be his Father and he will be my Son. And then he makes a point about how the angels are inferior to the Son. Their position is less, right? And he quotes passages like Psalm 97:7, that all the angels of God should worship him being the Son. And then his last kind of point that he makes is that the Son is eternal, and he's over the whole cosmos, the whole world, universe, right? He quotes from passages such as Psalm 102, 25 through 27. You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you continue. They will all become like an old garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up, and like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not run out. He talks about how the Son is both the one that started creation by laying the foundations and the one who's going to wrap it up, literally, roll it up at the end of time. And so he talks about this. Now, the thing is, why, right? It's not because his audience, the people he's writing this letter to, had some issue with worshiping angels, and he needs to make a point, like, hey guys, angels are not to be worshipped, or had some kind of weird thing going on like that, and that's why he needs to do this. They were putting angels on the same level as Jesus or something. No, it's because of what he's about to say next, what I'm going to talk about today. He's going somewhere with it. So this is what we're talking about today. Hebrews 2, 1 through 4 is the first exhortation passage in Hebrews. If you remember, Scott talked about how this book is laid out with some theology, and in between these exhortations, he's using these statements about theological things in the Old Testament to make exhortation, to encourage his listeners, like, stay the course. I know you're going to undergo persecution. I know it's hard, but you need to stay the course. You need to stay walking close to Jesus. And so this is the first of those passages where he kind of steps aside for a second from making all these points about Jesus, for using the Old Testament, to just really encourage his listeners. And you might also recall a great point that the Bible Project video made in their video about the book of Hebrews, is that these exhortation passages, they are meant to make you uncomfortable. That's kind of the point. But, this is very important, they're not meant to make you afraid. Afraid for your salvation or for your whatever. What God might do to you, I don't know. They're not meant to make you afraid, but they are meant to make you uncomfortable, to cause you to pause and think, evaluate, be maybe spurred on to closer action, as whatever. So, fair warning, since I'm preaching out of these verses, I will be doing the same. Yes. Got to stay true to the text. All right. So let's read it through, and we'll make some observations here. And it's not a there's not a lot of weird, hard to understand kind of Greek stuff going on in this. It's pretty straightforward, but we will make some observations. So here it is. I have it up on the slides, and if you want to read along, you might have a different version though. All right. Hebrews 2. Because of this, everything he's been saying up till this point, right? This thing about the angels and being less than the Son being over everything. Because of this, it is all the more necessary that we pay attention to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through angels was binding, and every transgression and act of disobedience received a just penalty, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which had its beginning when it was spoken through the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard, while God was testifying at the same time by signs and wonders and various miracles and distributions of the Holy Spirit according to his will. So, let's. This is a participation time. Let's make some observations about the text. What jumps out at you? Any words or thoughts or phrases that jump out at you? Penalty, yeah. Drift away. Disobedience. Distributions, yeah, kind of an interesting way to say it, isn't it? Yeah. Words spoken through angels, yeah, what's that about? Much closer attention. Mm-hmm. Validated and testified. You know, he is using like a lot of strong adjectives. Some phrases that kind of grab you, right? All the more necessary, someone said. Words like penalty and disobedience that kind of, depending on how you grew up, whether I don't mean necessarily your family, but your concept of God, or both maybe, might make you wince a little bit. But he uses phrases like that this was binding. He says, every transgression and act of disobedience. Talks about so great a salvation. Yeah, he's really saying this is really important, and he's trying to put all this language together to help qualify this. Now, the thing about the words spoken through angels might seem weird to us today. At the time, in early the early century, the first century, early in that first century, and maybe a little bit before Jesus too, it was really popular, like this notion in Judaism that the covenant at Sinai was mediated through angels. That angels were the ones who kind of like helped bring this about, right? That's kind of just how they thought about it. And so that's what he's addressing here. This was something that was had some, like, it was an attractive or kind of popular idea to the Judaism, especially in the Greek-speaking synagogues in the Mediterranean. And so that's what he's talking about, that, right? Something that they would have understood. Oh yeah, we know that what was actually going on, like the subtext in these descriptions about Mount Sinai or about whatever is that there's angels involved that are kind of like mediating this word. And so he uses that to make an argument from a lesser to a greater. This is a rabbinic technique that was popular at the time as well, part of, like, if you're a rabbi, you're trying to preach like a little homily or whatever at synagogue. This technique of making an argument from lesser to greater was something that you might use in your homily. And what it's about is you first you've got to establish or prove that two things, that one's lesser than the other, right? One's greater, one's lesser. And then you say, hey, what's true about the lesser is even more true about the greater. That's how the argument goes in general. So here he's doing it first in the section that Tony preached on 2 weeks ago. He's saying, hey, Jesus is far superior to the angels. Therefore, what's true about the word that came through the angels is even more true about the word that came through Jesus. It's an argument from lesser to greater. Does that make sense? That's the logic he's using here. You don't have to remember that that's what it's called, but I do want to kind of make sure you understand what he's doing. So that's what he's saying. Hey, if this word in the old covenant from Sinai that came through angels, it came. What came with it? It was binding. It was something that I think we've all read those passages in the Old Testament. Every transgression and act of disobedience received a just penalty. And so he's saying, if that's true of the lesser thing, how much more true is it that we're going to, if we neglect the word that was spoken through Jesus, that was confirmed by all these witnesses, that God himself testified to, and if we're going to neglect that, we're going to have even worse consequences than they did when they neglected the word at Sinai. That's the uncomfortable part. Now, Tony mentioned, he made some great observations last time about the passages in the Psalms that the preacher quotes from at the end of Hebrews 1. And I want to kind of just offer a few more, or kind of repeat couple more, because I think it's really important. These are some observations about how the preacher of Hebrews thinks of the Old Testament, and it's a guide to how we should think of the Old Testament. So first, I want you to notice that he just assumes the validity of the divine revelation in the Old Testament. Right? It's not replaced with the new revelation. It's just augmented. The new revelation is better. There's more, but it's not being replaced by that. He just assumes, we all agree on this, that all that was in the Old Testament was still valid. He also assumes that there's a continuity in the character and activity of God between the Old Testament and the New Testament. He's the same God doing the same kinds of things. And then thirdly, he assumes there's a continuity in the character of the people hearing the word, both from the old to the new, right? That we have a responsibility when we hear it. Just like they did then, we do now. And again, I say that because I just want to make the point that saying things like, and I haven't heard anybody in here say this, so I'm not talking about anybody here, but saying things like, all we need is the New Testament, Old Testament's the Old Covenant we got, we don't need to look at that or whatever. That's not how it goes. The preacher of Hebrews didn't think that. Jesus didn't think that when he said, yeah, that thing about don't kill, I meant that, and in fact, I'll raise you one. So, there you go. All right. Everyone with me so far? How you guys doing? Okay. All right. I said there was nothing really complicated about the Greek stuff. No, oh man, this is a bad translation or whatever. But I do want to make sure we kind of understand some nuances of meaning that the Greek words have for a few of these things. and or if it's a word that you like don't use all the time and you just want to, I want you to know exactly what he's meaning here. So the first one is binding, right? Something that's in force, right? If you've ever read the fine print on like some of these deals, binding arbitration or whatever, like hey, if there's a dispute, you got to go to an arbitrator, and whatever he decides, like you got to abide by it, So it means it's valid, it's in force, it's not something that's optional. The word penalty here, that is translated a little different in different. Some say retribution, some say punishment. The Greek word is just for recompense, and it's neutral as far as whether it's good or bad, right? Here he's using it in a negative sense, right? Like a punishment. Later in Hebrews 10, he uses it in a positive sense, like reward. But it's just what you get for your actions. Consequences might be a word that we use really commonly today, right? Although I think it's a little bit of a tame word. But in this case, he is talking about a negative consequence, so saying penalty or punishment is what he's talking about, right? In Hebrews 10, he's talking about as a positive consequence. So he says reward. The translators put in reward because that conveys, to the way we use the word today, reward usually means something positive. And then lastly, this word neglect. There is again in like legal definitions, there's a difference between willful neglect and unintentional neglect. Here he's talking about unintentional stuff, right? Not on purpose things. It's just more neglect through apathy, right? Like you didn't care enough to pay attention to it. You just kind of said, I think it'll be fine, and so I'm not going to worry about it, and so I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to see, you could turn on the faucet to your bathtub and say, look, I can tell from how fast it's filling up that I can go away and, mow the lawn while this thing fills up. Probably wouldn't be a good idea. But if you thought, yeah, I could do this task, and you just I don't even need to check on it. And then you came back and the tub was overflowing. Well, you neglected to check, and it wasn't willful. You just thought you didn't need to worry about it, and you weren't right about that. You should have, right? So that's what he's saying here. This isn't something that we should be going, I think it'll be fine. It'll work itself out on its own. No, he's saying we can't neglect this word of so great a salvation. We can't just be apathetic about it. We really have to pay much closer attention, like he says at the beginning. Does this make sense? Do I need to try again? Oh, yeah. Normally that should get everybody go, no, please don't, please move on. The last thing I want to say just about this is that actually one other thing before I go on to the next slide is that you notice one word in there. How will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? So he's talking to believers, right? This is not about how unbelievers might fall away if they don't listen to the word or whatever. He's saying we, so he's including himself. He's talking about Christians. And then just a kind of a point about the signs, wonders, and various miracles is what my translation that I'm using says. That the word miracles in the Bible is always, that's not a work of power is what the phrase is in the Greek. Dunamis, the same word Greek word that we get things from, like dynamite, the word dynamite from. And that's how that was their way of saying miracle. What we call a miracle is a work of power to them, right? So, and this triple expression here of signs, wonders, and miracles or works of power is used all over the New Testament, always to talk about God's activity when the gospel is being preached and how he is confirming the preaching of the gospel. And so that's what the preacher of Hebrews is talking about here. And you see a few examples. Peter in Acts 2, he's when he stands up and preaches his first sermon, and 2,000 people get saved. He's talking about how Jesus was attested to by deeds of power, which is miracles, right, and signs and wonders. And Paul talks about it, his own preaching of the gospel in Romans, and again in 2 Corinthians. There's other places, but these are three places where the preaching of the gospel and this signs, wonders, and miracles are tied together. All right? You guys still with me? Okay. I like the feedback.
Preach it, brother. Preach it.
Preach it. Am I making you uncomfortable yet?
No, you will.
So, what is God saying here to us? What was he saying to them, but he's saying the same thing to us. It's a call to commitment and responsibility. That's what it is. He's saying we can't afford to neglect this. We have to pay close attention. We have to be committed. We have to be responsible. We can't be apathetic, because there are serious consequences at stake. I don't know if you noticed the word just penalty, right? So we're not talking about, when we say words like punishment nowadays, I think sometimes we wince a little bit because we think that maybe God is going to like react in a rage or something like people that we know, like ourselves, right? He's not that way. When he says this was wrong, you're not going to be able to say it was right. Now, the good thing is that when he says this is right, you can't say, but God, you don't know the full story. No. Like if he says you did a good job, it's because he knows the full story, and you say you did a good job. But at the same time, the flip side of that is if he says that was not good, you can't argue. I mean, you could argue, but it is to no effect. And you're free to argue. God's not afraid of you arguing with him. But you should expect him to address it with you. But it's better to do that than to just not talk about it with him. So, but anyway, that's an aside. He is saying, he's calling us to personal commitment and responsibility. So, before I go any further, I do want to say that I'm gonna talk about commitment and responsibility and churches and our culture nowadays, and I may even say a few things about church hopping or whatever. We'll see what comes out. Now, before I go forward though, everybody listen to me. If you're looking up a scripture on your phone or checking your Instagram or whatever, eyes up. What I'm about to say has nothing to do with the fact that just by coincidence, Bev and Bruno are here today and we've blessed them to go on to another church. Okay? Like, I would have been talking about this whether this had happened or not. This is the sermon. All right? They've done it the right way. And so I don't want you to, don't even think about it. I want you to hear what I'm saying and not be in the back of your mind, I wonder if Bev and Bruno are taking that the wrong way or whatever. Or I wonder if I should be offended on their behalf. Okay. They're not sneaking out the back door. They came to us and said, yep, this is what we want to do. And I know them well enough that if Scott and I had said, man, I just don't feel the Lord is in this, and we could have talked to them and we could have figured out whether we were right or they were right. Like they wouldn't have just said, nah, screw you, right? Of course not. This is Bev and Bruno we're talking about. So, okay. So enough said about that. But, am I digging a deeper hole? Oh, man, that's too bad. I did say I was going to make everyone uncomfortable. So, here we go. Ready? Strap in. Okay. We have kind of this. There's a lot of kind of an a la carte mentality going on in churchgoers today. Like, I like the worship there. I like the preaching there. Maybe I'll just hop around, or they don't have what I need for my, they're not meeting my needs. I'm going to move around, and never getting plugged in, never really identifying with that community and trying to receive from them and give back. And it's what I like to call being a spiritual vagabond. You're just wandering around from place to place. I was thinking earlier, this is my paraphrase of something that I heard Richard say a number of years ago that really stuck with me, which is there's only one reason to go to a church body and one reason to leave a church body ever, and it's the same reason if God tells you to. Having a beef with one of the other members isn't a reason. In that, God might tell you, but if He tells you go or stay, you go or stay. But and it's not. Oh, I don't. They're not meeting my needs or whatever either, right? They don't have this or that, or I don't feel like I'm fed there or whatever. None of those are good reasons. But yeah, we've become more, and thankfully I don't see that, in the folks here. But there is a way to do that and not be church hopping too, right? Which is just by never connecting, like never allowing someone to say, "Man, I've known you for a little while now. Can I talk to you about something?" Like if you don't have somebody in your life that can tell you no and you'll listen, that's a problem. Or when they try to tell you no, you say, I think I'm going to go to another church for whatever reason. Mike Series works a lot with the homeless, as I think we all know. And he talks often about how, because you don't have a home, you're living on the streets, these folks have to be really protective, and it's hard for them to be vulnerable, open up. It's always about, I got to keep my stuff. What if somebody's taking my stuff? I got to stand up for myself, or else I'm going to get run over and all that. And I see a lot of spiritual homelessness in our churches. People that are like that, closed in, and don't want to be vulnerable. I don't mean that somebody has to, instantly do that. We're all not, as soon as you go to a church, right? We're all not Tony, who can do that like so easily, or Mike Series, just go to some place and go, "Hey, I'm here. This is who I am," right? It might take you a second, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, part of a call to personal commitment and responsibility is that God set this up as a community. He wants to rule the world through the human race, not just a person or a few people, like everybody that'll join him in that. Through a community, right? That's how He set it up. You can not like it, but that's too bad. Like, it's His world and it's His rules. You have to get over it. Yeah. Heard that somewhere. And He does that sometimes in really really sneaky ways. Like the thing that the breakthrough that you need in your life, you're not getting because the way He wants to give it to you is by having a person that you don't get along with pray for you. And you think, "Man, why can't I grow in this area?" And God's saying, "Why can't you get along with so-and-so?" God, but that doesn't have to do with my question. Okay, I bet it does. Yeah. He put us in this community and we can't just if we refuse, we could be in the house but still be homeless, right? And not really have a place that man, these folks care about me, care for me, and I can also use my giftings, because God, guess what? God wants to use you too, and maybe the church isn't getting everything that it should be getting because you're not putting something in. The bottom line is that that autonomy and independence, and by that I mean things like I just want to do it my way, I want to control my own life and destiny. That autonomy and independence are contrary to the purposes and ways of God. Autonomy and independence are contrary to the purposes and ways of God. Yep. I should have issued steel-toed shoes in case I stepped on any toes. Yeah. And this thing about autonomy and independence, we all go, oh yeah, because I got to follow the Lord, right? I got to do what He says. Yeah, sure. That's not the part I'm talking about. That's hard enough. But what can be a lot harder is recognizing when somebody that maybe they're younger in the faith than I am, maybe I don't think they know what they're talking about, but they have the absolute word of the Lord for me. And will I listen? Or when God asks me to tell something to somebody who's older than me in the faith and who I feel like inadequate about, will I? Because God didn't want to just tell them Himself. Again, I've said this so many times lately, but I'm not exhausted saying it. God wants to do it through us and in us. He never wanted to do it by Himself. It's like the age-old question of what do you give a billionaire, right? What do you give a man or a woman who can get or buy anything they want, right? like God does. He could do anything He wants. He doesn't go, oh yeah, this will be something new and exciting. No, what He wants what's new and exciting is, hey, I want to do this with them, and I want to let them just choose. But I want them to trust me. We'll see how it goes. So anyway, we need to be, we need to take this call to personal commitment and responsibility really seriously as the preacher is talking about it, and encourage others to do so if we need to. That we need to be in community. We need to be, the Bible has a lot to say about submission of various kinds, mutual submit yourself to one another's, it's all about let's work together, and yes, there are in different times and places and ways, some people have more responsibility over someone else and all that, but this is how God set it up. So, it's a question of the heart, right? What's in your heart when I'll use a simple example that most of the time is not like of life and death, earth-shattering consequence, although maybe it is more than we think. What if someone is leading worship or leading a ministry time, and they say, hey, let's do this together, let's stand and raise our hands, or let's all pray for the prodigals to come home, or whatever. If something in your heart kind of jumps a little bit and goes, well, I don't got to, right? Like, don't tell me what to do. I have freedom in the Lord. That's a good one. I have freedom in the Lord to not do it. If something rises up in your heart a little bit, check that. Check that out. It's not about the external action. Maybe you didn't do it because you were so lost in the presence you didn't even hear what the person said. Like, there's lots of legit reasons that you may be doing or not doing whatever someone asked you to do, whether it's in that setting or some kind of let's support these missionaries, right? It's something bigger than like that. Like, we're saying, hey, all of us together, we're going to do this, and you can't just write a check. That's not what supporting missionaries is about. Right? That's something maybe of more import, at least from our vantage point, than just whether or not we all, every one of us prayed for the prodigals on a certain, Saturday. So it's not about what you're doing or not doing, but if that thing rises up in your heart, that's still, a way to be like a little disconnected. Well, I don't got to, right? I mean, the Lord hasn't, I don't feel the Lord calling me to do that right now. I feel him saying I don't have to. And those kinds of spiritual reasons. Like when Jesus reprimanded the Pharisees for saying, hey, there's this commandment about honoring your father and mother, but you guys have this loophole around it by saying, hey, that money I was going to give you and to help you kind of in your old age, I gave it as an offering, so I get a pass. I don't have to support you or help you because it was an offering. The Lord is pleased. The Lord is pleased. And Jesus says, no. You're nullifying and making void the word of God. Serious words. And so, let's not make spiritual sounding excuses either for our disobedience or for our resistance to what he's calling us to do. So, here's what I want to do. The preacher says we should be paying attention even more closely lest we drift away. He doesn't qualify what drift means. But drift, the word, is a slow thing, right? And neglect and the consequences of that can be slow at times. You just don't pay attention for a little bit, And at first nothing seems to happen. But then soon it gets worse and worse. So what I want to do is I want to pray. I want us to pray, to spend like 30 seconds, 60 seconds right now, listening to the Lord about what he wants you to do from what I've said. Right? What is he speaking to you about that you need to pay closer attention to? That you've maybe been neglecting, that you've put on the back burner and said it's not that important right now, it'll be fine. And he's saying you need to pay attention to this. So let's just spend a minute or two doing that.